Okay, looks like it's just 4 o'clock, so I know it's the last session of the day. We're all tired. So uh appreciate those of you that stayed around and elected to come to this presentation at the end. My name's Matt Marbois with the State Construction Office. To my left is Bill Stevens with DHHS, and we're here today to talk to you about uh, after the ribbon cutting, owner responsibilities prescribed within the North Carolina Building Codes and reference standards. I'd like to start off with a little break, maybe just we've all been sitting or for a long time today. Everybody raise either your left or right hand and keep your hand up until you answer this question. Uh, If your hand remains standing, you feel like you know all there is in the technical codes and the reference standards of adopted in North Carolina. So I said that as a rhetorical question because just a brief story. 30 years ago, some odd years, an electrician on a job site challenged me on a electrical code question, and I failed. And he, someone I've really come to respect and know, uh, he challenged me to improve my knowledge, and I elected to do so. And on my own, started taking code classes that are offered, if you didn't know, at the community colleges or across North Carolina, and proceeded to get certified in all the various levels of fire, building, and mechanical, and not knowing, 10 or 15 years later, I'd be working with the state construction office as a design reviewer. So I say that all to say, this was in your handouts this morning when you registered. There's still some pieces, they're still available at the registration desk. This is a blurb about the state construction office and open positions that we have. So I would encourage you to consider that. Even if you right now in your career feel like this is not a good opportunity for you, I would still encourage you to, on behalf of your just professional knowledge, to take advantage of these classes that are offered. You do get PDH credits for those as well as AIA credits. And who knows, maybe there'll be an opportunity that later on to come to work for the state construction office or another jurisdiction sometime in the future. So I think that's it. Uh, this picture is obviously of a ribbon cutting. I'd call your attention to who's not pictured in these photographs, who I feel like is someone that should be there, which is the maintenance person, he or she wearing coveralls or a hard hat or whatever, carrying a toolbox, because that person knows what's ahead of them after everybody else leaves and the celebration is over with, which is all the headaches, inspections, testing, and maintenance that they're going to be responsible for. So I purposely thought about giving this presentation as a illustration and more emphasis on one of my passions. If you all have come to previous state construction conferences in the past, you see some examples there on the screen. One of our passions in our office is prevention through design, PTD. And if you have not ever heard of that, I encourage you to learn more about it. It is a initiative that was established in 2006 by the NIOSH, a long acronym for National Institute of Occupational Safety and Health. They have a website. The easiest way to get there is to just Google prevention through design. That will take you right there. There's a lot of information, a lot of great references for how safety for maintenance can be affected in the design of a building, and improve and reduce the likelihood of injuries or uh, damage that occurs possibly, as over the life of the building. So I say all that to say that the 2020 State Construction Office Electrical Guidelines and Policies requires designers to implement prevention through design in their projects. It is going to be implemented in the State Construction Manual update. We're hoping to issue that later this year, if not early next year, that will now apply to all aspects of a building, including all the systems, structural, plumbing, mechanical. Right now, like I said, it's only implemented in electrical. But so what we're going to talk on, as you see in the last bullet, is maintenance requirements as a building owner that are required in the North Carolina building codes and their reference standards. So we're going to, we're going to start off by looking at the administrative code, which, as we see in 101.2, explains what are the technical codes. And what you see on the slide here is a photograph of the covers of the current suite of technical codes adopted in North Carolina. That's the 2018 version. As we are here today, March 6th, there is no current hard copy of the 2024 North Carolina suite of technical codes, even though those will be adopted effective July 1st, but you cannot buy one right now. They're in production. We don't have an update yet from the Office of the State Fire Marshal when they will be, but that's a lot of what you'll hear today in our presentation is still related to both what's going to be coming as well as the current technical codes. And then what you see there in the second bullet is plumbing, mechanical, electrical, fire prevention, and gas systems are referenced as service systems whenever they're discussed in these technical codes. So the other thing that we want you to take away from this presentation is the reference standards. In section 101.3.5 of the administrative code, it does say that the standards referenced in the technical codes are considered an integral part of the code. So they have the same effect, same mandate for adherence, right? And there's each of the technical codes, building, fire, mechanical, so on, contains a chapter on the reference standards. In the North Carolina Building Code, you see a page here excerpted from there. This is a page, the first page of the suite of NFPA reference standards that are adopted. And a point of education, if I'm sure most of us in the room that are in design realize this, but the North Carolina technical codes come from an organization called the International Code Council. What you see here on the screen is a cover page of the various codes that are published by the ICC, and you see in the numbered list there their names, and you probably see a couple that you aren't familiar with, maybe as an example, the Green Construction Code or the Performance Code, because those are not adopted in North Carolina. And there's 9 others that you see there in the last item that aren't even illustrated. That just gives you an idea of the suite of these codes that are available. So what North Carolina does is we're always 3 years, actually 6 years and sometimes, but we're like, for example, the 2018 North Carolina technical codes are based on the 2015 ICC codes. So the 2024 building codes that are coming out, or technical codes, those are going to be based on the 2021 ICC codes. So we're always 3 years behind, and then the legislature mandated that we can't update our codes except for every 6 years. So I think one more slide and then Bill's up. So I just did want to comment on one of the suite of ICC codes that is not adopted in North Carolina. This one is called the Property Maintenance Code. And you see there in red, this code covers all the minimum requirements and standards for these various systems, process systems that we were talking about, and offers uh, and and details to the building owners and the owner's authorized agent and operators and occupants their responsibility. So even though the North Carolina suite of technical codes doesn't adopt this one, what you're going to hear and see in these next slides in our presentation is there are still inspection, testing, and maintenance, or ITM, requirements in the suite of codes that North Carolina adopts.
Thanks, Matt. So this is just a slide kind of, you're going to see a few of these afterwards, but basically what they're doing is they're kind of tying in the fact that these codes cover maintenance. This is going to be something that builds. We see in the North Carolina Building Code, we've got 63 instances of the word maintain or maintenance. Just so keep an idea that, and the number is going to start escalating as we move on. So we also see that the code touches on things that may not be very important to us. We think that, why is the code telling us we got to maintain the building address and maybe the name of the building? Usually what happens is if the code addresses it, it has some connection with life safety. In this case, you can kind of use your imagination. Just think of an emergency responder coming up, and maybe you've got a few buildings out there and they're kind of confused on which one to turn into. This code really keeps us safe. It keeps the building identifiable. Early responders can come to it. And kind of emphasize the fact that life safety is involved in the codes. This is a good slide for that. We see the terms hazard of fire, explosion, conditions hazardous to life, property, fire hazards to the structure, conditions affecting safety of firefighters, emergency response operations. So just kind of instill that, yep, life safety is pretty much the reason behind these. And then we turn to the North Carolina Fire Prevention Code itself, again, in that same format. Maintenance is covered. This time, look at the number of instances that maintain is kind of identified in this code reference. All right, I'm going to read this directly. This is the North Carolina Fire Prevention Code and existing buildings. So the question we have is, for changes in maintenance, testing, and record keeping within the forthcoming 2024 North Carolina Fire Prevention Code, are these retroactive to existing buildings? We're all familiar on the design side with the codes being grandfathered in. If you did something, if there's something that was met code back in the day and we're not touching it, we can leave it that way until obviously we start doing something with it for design. So the question is in other words, will building owners be responsible to update their current practices for maintenance, testing, and records to conform? So show of hands, who thinks they're grandfathered in? Another smart crews. Yeah. I know I kind of flipped a coin, but I was just conservative, so it went that way. Hampton, you had a question? Oh, okay. Oh, you're voting for that one. Okay. Okay. We've got an answer here. Our Charlie Johnson, who's our chief fire code consultant for State Fire Marshal, he says this. He says, yes, section 102.2 will state that administrative, operational, and maintenance provisions from the code will apply to new and existing buildings. So bottom line, yes, building owners should update current practices to align with these requirements. Typical fire alarm riser diagram. You know that these systems get put in. Usually what happens is hopefully a long time after the ribbon cutting, the facility is notified that, hey, your fire alarm system is going obsolete. That means we're not going to support it anymore. It's going to cost you more money to get the parts, and it's going to be harder to find the parts. They're going to take longer to get there. So typically, armed with this information, the facility goes and they contact Matt's office and they say, hey, is it okay if we just, this is a burden. Is it okay if we just remove this from our building? Problem solved, solution. We don't have this irritating thing that we got to maintain anymore. Well, if you look at this last sentence, that red part there, it kind of tells us that it clearly mandates that a system installed as part of the original building construction, unfortunately, has to be maintained for the life of the building. So hopefully that saves you a few questions, Matt. All right. And then as we continue on with the North Carolina Fire Prevention Code, it talks about testing that has to be done as well as maintenance. So certain systems in our facilities require testing, and that's so that to make sure that they're going to operate when they're actually needed. And not only do they have to do the testing and then the maintenance, but they also have to follow up with recording the fact that they've done those. So we see some standard logs, and our maintenance folks, unfortunately, they don't have enough things to do on their plate. They also have to make sure they do the record keeping. They have to keep these records for not less than 3 years. Some code makes you keep those a little bit longer, so we have to follow those. And then they have to be able to be presented upon demand to the authority having jurisdiction. All right. So supervision under the North Carolina Fire Prevention Code. Maintenance and testing shall be under the supervision of a responsible person. So this is the person that has to take in all of these codes, digest them, apply them to their facilities, and make sure the maintenance is done, the record keeping is done. I have a whole higher level of respect for our maintenance folks after going through this, and especially as you see the other code books piling on with the references to maintenance. So they have to be aware of this. But the question is, can our maintenance folks, do they have to be stationed at the actual facility that they're maintaining? Well, we know there's different sizes of facilities, right? Some of them are smaller. One person can handle multiple buildings. So for this reason, obviously, the maintenance folks can be remote, but they're the ones that are responsible. All right, we see here a firefighter's phone and a fire alarm manual pull station. It needs to stay running. You can't take it down. You might say, hey, well, our fire alarm system is one of those ones that went obsolete. We're going to be down for about 2 months. What can we do? Obviously, in that case, you would need to implement a fire watch, and that has to comply with the OSFM requirements. Right. And also take note that it has to be accessible. It can't be rendered inaccessible, because this next slide kind of touches on that. So here we have clearances around connections. This time it's a standpipe system for sprinkler system. These, along with that past slide and this connection, they're typically easy to maintain clearances, right? We have 3 feet in front of it because they're placed in locations where people walk. Usually it's in corridors or something like that, but it's not always the case. So if we take a look now, I'm going to play a short video, but please, you cannot guess where this is located. You're not allowed to guess. That's the rule. Yeah. Pretend you didn't see any plans or prints. Keep in mind the camera does distort distances. So I'm not sure, but I think if we put a tape measure to that, it probably would be a little less than that 3 feet required. But Matt has assured me that he's got a team of code police out converging on this location. I think it's a squad of code police taking care of this incident. All right. And kind of along those same lines, North Carolina Fire Prevention Code Appendix D. And here you see some required clearances, 20 feet on each side of that hydrant. They did a great job camouflaging this. I think maybe green paint would have made it complete. But the thing is that state construction office, they can't police this because they're, even though they're the authority having jurisdiction, they can't say anything, they can say something, but they can't enforce it unless the local fire jurisdiction has adopted Appendix D of the North Carolina Fire Code. So that might change as we go throughout the state. This might be something that can be enforced, or it may not be. But at the very least, we could recommend to the facility that, hey, you know, look what Appendix D says. All right. All right, emergency battery units, exit signs, they have testing requirements every month. You got to do 30 seconds test. You can think of the poor folks that's got to go around to the ladder, push the button, go down the next one, 25 feet, push the button. It can be tons of these things in a facility. And then that's for the battery units. And even if you have a generator life safety system and all your life safety lights are in a generator, you still have the testing requirements. And sometimes they use night lights for a facility. That's great for a 24-hour facility like a hospital or something like that. But there's buildings out there that are quite large where you don't need to leave the lights burning at all the time. If you use a UL 924 listed little module, you can turn those on and off with the normal lights, and it will still give you the testing requirements that this code is requiring. And then there is another thing too. We think about all the maintenance that has to be done, and they got busy schedules. They have to understand all these references to the code. So there's quite a lot of things that our maintenance folks have to take care of. One thing that manufacturers typically offer with emergency battery units is the self-test feature, a very small upgrade. But what it does is it complies with what this code is requiring. The interesting thing about that is, I know let back up a little bit, as engineers, we typically aren't the first to adopt something new, right? The self-test feature though, and if I can recall properly, I think it's been around for a couple of decades anyways, but according to state construction, they've yet to review a single set of plans that has been submitted with a self-test feature for these. Just think about all the man hours that can be saved just for that one little design change. So we talk about, what is it? Prevention through design. Thank you. Prevention through design. Well, if we prevent some maintenance through their design options, then that will be very helpful to our maintenance folks. And then the North Carolina Fire Prevention Code would not be complete without something that addresses electrical hazards. This takes all forms, but those things have to be remedied rather quickly as soon as they're identified. Then it goes into labeling, got our electrical rooms that need to be labeled. We see a panel board directory. And as far as I'm aware, that if an inspector comes and looks at it, the only thing that's acceptable is a typewritten directory. It's got to be accurate. It's got to be detailed. It has to have the proper information on it. So we see that this probably would not be acceptable. And two, we can't forget our above ceiling items. Sometimes there's some unapproved conditions up there. A lot of things that have to be corrected as well. And then we have appliances. They have to be maintained. I think I may have been guilty of this one time. You see this gentleman up there with these very small diameter LED downlights. I think I got this question. When it went through SCO review, the question was, how do you maintain that fixture? In this case, how does this gentleman get to that LED driver that's above that light? I don't know how you would get through that. So in that case, designer would have to make sure that access panels were provided, or through the manufacturer of it, they have kind of come up with a solution for it. All right, I think this is probably could have been in that earlier presentation under bad. We have motors that are in places where they're really not going to operate very well. They have to be maintained free from excessive accumulations, oil, dirt, waste, and debris. Not photoshopped. Moving on, we have 3308.1 program superintendent. The owner shall designate a person to be the fire prevention program superintendent who shall be responsible for the fire prevention program. So this is the person that has to come up with the pre-fire plans. They make sure all the training's done, make sure the fire protection devices are set in their appropriate settings. And they're the ones that issue the hot work permits. Now if you've been to new construction, you know that this person is around. We've always, on almost every, not on almost every project, on every project, we know there's that individual. What's often overlooked, though, is on after the fact. We've got a small renovation, maybe it's a small project, but certain work that's under this still needs to be done, even in demolition, I think. So in that case, you're not relieved of your obligations under this code. You still need this person. You still need to follow all of those plans or code requirements. In the same format, we see in the North Carolina Mechanical Code, the number of instances that maintenance is addressed. And that includes periodic testing. You know, certain pieces of equipment need testing as well as maintenance. In this case, it's the ones that contain refrigerant. You see here, if you have the common refrigerant, the A1 refrigerant, you need to have more than 220 pounds of it before you're kicked into the code required periodic test. If you transition to the higher efficiency, newer A2L refrigerant systems, look at what it drops down to. It drops from 220 pounds down to 30 pounds where you're required to do those tests. The reason for that is it's so much more flammable than the other refrigerant. And in doing so, it also changes the hazard classification of the mechanical room that it's in. So when you take on a project like this, you want to make sure that you address the hazard classification, class 1, div 2. And then you have all the existing circuiting that goes through there. You have to make sure that that circuiting also transition is changed so that it can comply with the new hazardous location based on the newer efficiency of the refrigerant. Wouldn't be complete if we didn't leave out the NEC. We see that there's 69 instances of the word maintain, 218 instances of the word maintenance, and 67 instances of maintained. Sometimes the code requires you to do nothing. In this case, it doesn't want you to start storing stuff in front of the equipment. It's got clearances that are required, so you don't have to do anything, just kind of leave it alone. And then sometimes the owner has to put up protection to keep people to make people do nothing. So we see here that the NEC that's pretty much a violation in quite a lot of facilities that you go to. But in this case, we want to make sure also if we do the caging that it complies with what the NEC requires for access to. And I believe this is a Duke Energy storage facility. We know that batteries need maintenance. And then there's new batteries technologies coming out all the time. So each one of those may have different maintenance requirements as specified from the manufacturer. And we just want to highlight that those need to be complied with. All right. Well, that is my final slide. Thank you, everybody. I'll give our attention back to Matt Marbois.
Thank you, Bill. Thank you. So next we want to talk or touch on just a few examples of the reference standards. I mentioned or alluded to earlier, each of the suite of technical codes includes a chapter of referenced standards. And remember, the administrative code says the requirements therein have just as much adherence mandates on you as an owner as what are requirements in the suite of technical codes. So here's an illustration of that. This is ASME A17.1, safety code for elevators and escalators. Notice the red highlight that there are maintenance requirements for elevators. Just one aside here, it's been a struggle with the State Construction Office and the North Carolina Department of Labor Elevator Division, because the reference standard for ASME A17.1 that's in our current building code references the year 2013 ASME A17.1. The problem is the North Carolina Department of Labor Elevator Division, they have their own enforcement, and they have advanced beyond the 2013, and they're currently now enforcing the 2022 revision of ASME A17.1. So essentially what we do when we get a project that involves an elevator, we essentially bring to the designer and the owner's attention, look, we're going to review this project and against the current requirements of the 2013 code, but we know, by the way, that the Department of Labor Elevator Division has advanced to the 2022, and here's a few illustrated bullets of what you are going to be expected to do. But what I said earlier about the struggles, we're trying to work better with the Department of Labor Elevator Division so that they understand the harmony needs there between our respective agencies, because we have designers and owners, and the last thing that either one of them want at the beneficial occupancy final inspection, when the elevator inspector shows up from the Department of Labor, is they say, tick, 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 you haven't done these yet, so I'm not going to give you beneficial on the elevator. So just word of advice there to keep that in mind with your design teams as well. Another reference standard that's in the building code is NFPA 110. This is the standard for emergency and standby power systems. And I call your attention to the red highlighted items. Often what we see for building owners is once the generator is installed, is they fail to maintain the generator in terms of testing that's required by this reference standard monthly. And this, when they do the testing, they don't load the generator up. They just turn the generator on, run it for 30 minutes and turn it off. But if you see here in the red highlighted items, not only do you need to run and exercise the generator every month, you have to exercise the transfer switch. So what that means is when you're running the generator, you need to transfer the transfer switch from normal power to the generator power and back. Because if you don't do that, you're not complying with the direction of the required maintenance. And at the same time, notice too, the next bullet says that if you have a level 1 emergency power supply system, which is one that's supplying life safety, things like emergency lighting, then any breakers between the source generator and the transfer switch need to be cycled as part of that on and off. So it's a point I'm trying to illustrate is owners need to be aware of these requirements and these reference standards and be sure that you're following through with all the various tasks that are in those reference standards. So I want to spend the last part of this presentation talking about a subject that maybe is not necessarily part of the suite of technical codes or reference standards, but it's related in that all the OSHA requirements for arc flash and hazard mitigation is a requirement for building owners. So I want to make sure you're aware if you were not, but if there's anybody here that's ex-military, ignorance is no excuse. You can't say to the OSHA inspector when they show up, why aren't you doing A, B, and C? You can't, if you say, I didn't know, that's not going to get you an out, right? So these are new requirements that came out in November of last year. And what you see on these bulleted items here is there is some resources available to you as an owner, i.e. as an employer, as well as resources for your employees or workers that if you have not accessed, I would encourage you to do so. At the end of this presentation, there will be a slide that will have Bill's and my contact information, as well as links that will allow you to take advantage of getting some of these resources that I'm referencing to you, so you can make sure you're cognizant of those requirements. And what these requirements that are new are trying to mitigate is what you see there in the middle of the screen, is what OSHA has noticed is over the last 20 years, we have reduced the number of fatalities and the number of injuries suffered by workers on electrical equipment. But we've reached a plateau. We're still around 100 to 150 fatalities annually and close to 1,000 injuries. And through some research and investigations, what OSHA has discovered is they believe that primary causes of why they can't get down to zero is what you see there in those bulleted items, is that in interviewing the workers thought that the equipment was de-energized when it actually was not, or they, especially this is true of older workers that have been doing the same task for decades or more, is they've gotten used to working on low voltage, thinking that low voltage can't injure them or kill them. But as you see there, even 120 volts in the right conditions can cause serious injury. So the last two bullets, I just want to call your attention. These are now standards. They used to be recommended practices, but now OSHA is saying these are standards that owners must adhere to. One is the standard for electrical equipment maintenance, and the other is the standard for electrical safety in the workplace. And I will just call your attention to a couple of features of NFPA 70B, which offers a consistent set of maintenance guidance across all types of facilities with electrical systems, and encourages you as an owner to categorize your electrical equipment and identify its criticality. So is it a life safety system like a generator and emergency lighting, or is it just a incidental use, or receptacles or something that's supplying some sort of convenience load, right? So you categorize your equipment by age, by equipment type, switchboard, panel board, and how critical the equipment is to your system. And then it then allows you to then follow the NFPA 70B recommended practices and address any risks that might arise and be in compliance with OSHA. Now, one note about OSHA in North Carolina. North Carolina is one of 18 states that self-administers their safety program. So in other words, OSHA doesn't show up on your work site when there's an incident. It's the North Carolina Department of Labor Safety and Health Division, but they follow all of the OSHA requirements, right? And including penalties. And the current penalties, if you haven't heard, they get adopted updated annually in January. And the current fee violations right now are, as of January this year, $16,550 for a serious violation, and for willful or repeated violations, $165,514. That's per violation. So if you have more than one violation that's discovered after an incident or per person, you can see how those will add up over time. So as I talk about these new guidances, I mentioned that one of the discoveries OSHA made is that injuries or fatalities were happening because the worker thought the equipment was de-energized. I turned off the switch. I locked it out and tagged it out. I thought it was dead. Well, the old adage of, yeah, I turned the switch off. We don't need to follow arc flash hazard analysis. We don't need to label our equipment. We don't need to buy PPE because our policy at this building and this facility and this campus is we always work de-energized. So we don't have to follow arc flash. So this illustrates why OSHA is saying no more. You have to establish an electrical safety work condition, ESWC, in order for you to comply with these new guidance requirements. And this is one example why that is the case. In 2018, Schneider Electric, which a lot of people know as Square D, they had to issue a recall for over 1 million of their safety switches because you turn the switch off, it was still allowing the load to be energized. And the same thing happened the same year with Eaton Cutler Hammer. I can't find the basis for this, but my conclusion is because of the commonality of the year 2018, more likely the original equipment manufacturer, the OEM that supplied the switches to Schneider Electric and Eaton is the entity at fault, whose switches still didn't work, when they turned the switch off. So anyway, those are illustrations of why we have this new requirement from OSHA. Another is circuit breakers. If anybody's ever heard of Federal Pacific, they're notorious. It's an obsolete manufacturer that no longer exists, but they produce breakers, and when you turn the breaker off, it was still allowing current to flow. The supplied load was still energized. So another reason, and there are other manufacturers that the equipment can fail, right? So this slide is talking about PPE or personal protective equipment. Gives you 2 examples of the types of PPE that you can wear based on the hazard. And you see the illustration there of the various levels. One point of information here, arc flash hazard labeling in the National Electrical Code is only required for service equipment above 1,000 amps. So in the pending 2023 National Electrical Code, that's going to be increased to also require feeder equipment, but again, above 1,000 amps. So the point I'm trying to make here is the NEC does not require you to put arc flash hazard labels on all electrical equipment, just certain pieces of it if you see at high ampacities. So kudos to East Carolina, University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, because they have implemented as a policy on their campuses arc flash hazard analyses and application of arc flash hazard labels all across the board, all equipment, all buildings on their campuses. So we cannot require that. The state construction office cannot require a building owner to do that. But I just offer that as an illustration to you that they on their own have elected to do that. And oh, by the way, those are OSHA requirements. And we do not inspect and we do not review plans for OSHA. But as an owner, you're required to comply. So again, that's why we're talking about this and trying to make sure you're aware of these latest requirements. So this is a short video that I'll play, and I just call your attention to the 2 pictures that. So what you see on the left is something called arc resistant clothing. And obviously on the right is non-arc resistant clothing. The same arc was exposed to the 2 mannequins, and you see the difference. 25 years ago, when arc resistant clothing first came out, most workers complained and denied wanting to wear it because it was too scratchy, too hot. So the industry has come a long way since then. There's arc resistant clothing now that is just as comfortable as what you can buy from Lands' End or any other major retailer. So don't wear fuel is what you see on the slide. That's in the OSHA guidance. Every day, this should be daily wear for your workers that are working on electrical equipment is wearing arc resistant clothing. And notice too, lockout, tag out, electric safety working condition, right? Those are in other words, just turning off equipment and putting a lockout tag on it is not sufficient anymore. You have to establish that condition. So how do you, So how do you do that? What you see here on the slide are 2 pictures. One on the left is a maintenance person who's getting ready to take measurements to prove that the equipment is de-energized before they start performing their maintenance tasks. The picture on the picture on the right is the same piece of equipment, but in this case, it has on the door something called an AVT, or absence of voltage tester. So these products are available now on the market and have been for a number of years. And OSHA will allow you as a building owner to put these AVTs on your equipment and not require you to follow their practices mandating that you prove the equipment is de-energized, which is what you would have to do as illustrated on the picture on the left. So after you turned off the switch or the breaker that's feeding this panel and put your lockout and tagout on it, after you open the door, then based on the incident energy on this panel, you have to don the appropriate equipment, bring your multimeter up to it. And actually what the procedure says is you take that multimeter and you test it individually just to make sure it works, apply it to the equipment that you're going to maintain, make sure it's dead, and then you take it to something that you know is live and you put it on that. So it's live, dead, live. You have to follow that process wearing the PPE the whole time before it meets OSHA's credits for being totally de-energized and in a safe working condition. Or, like I said, you could, as an owner, decide that you want to implement these AVTs and put this on your equipment. And I think we all will see which way we would prefer to go. I've yet to see a project submitted to the state construction office that has put these AVTs in their design documents, not one. So in sum, bring our presentation to a close. The North Carolina Building Codes and Reference Standards contain inspection, testing, and maintenance requirements that are the responsibilities of the owner. Owners are urged to consider these ITM impacts from the pending 2024 suite of technical codes, which are going to be effective July 1st, and get up to date with those, so you know what's coming in terms of changes. And a point of information here about the FCAP program. I think all of us were here hopefully in the morning when Joe Baden from our FCAP team gave his presentation. FCAP will not, when they come to your facility, they aren't checking to see if you're following these maintenance requirements that are in the suite of technical codes. That's not what they do. They're just checking upkeep. What condition is your roof in, your mechanical system, et cetera, et cetera. So, and they're not code enforcement officials. Prevention through design. I would encourage you to implement that as a practice. If you're a building owner, require your designers to implement prevention through design as part of your projects. It is going to be in our state construction manual across all systems in the pending update, which hasn't been published yet. And then the last bullet, I'll just call your attention to what's in our state construction manual with respect to owner facilities maintenance staff, that we want the facilities maintenance staff to be an active participant in design reviews. We encourage them to review the projects with the designers, provide input. They're the best ones to know what they're going to be required to do serviceability wise, maintainability wise in the future going forward. I had at the earlier presentation, we had a feedback on this topic that the maintenance staff, when they're at these design review meetings, often don't understand what's being shown to them on the plans when they're looking. And I think those of us that are engineers or architects know, it's, if you're looking at a drawing or two-dimensional drawing and translating that to a 3D understanding of what it's going to be as far as access to equipment and clear corridors and so on, that's difficult to understand. As a maintenance person, I can sympathize. So my response to that question was to point out, until the person's comments and concerns are addressed, the designer is not doing their job. They need to stay there long enough, or if they can't explain it, take them to another facility that illustrates for that maintenance person, this is similar to what you're going to see, so they can they can understand it if that's what it takes, or do a 3D model or Revit or something like that. And that's a really good way for maintenance people to understand the project. So this is our final slide. I'll leave this up if there's any questions. I call your attention to the last couple of hyperlinks there on the screen. The first hyperlink will take you to the Office of the State Fire Marshal, where you can see the codes when they're published. It'll be a read-only at sometime between now and July 1st. If you want hard copies, you'll have to purchase those. The next link is a 30-minute training video I would encourage each of you to view. It was put out by a company called Tyndall and talks about the OSHA changes that came out last fall. It has some really good illustrations of arc flash and what you can do to help mitigate it. And then the last two hyperlinks that you see are those guidance documents I was referring to earlier that's been published by OSHA last fall. So any questions? Yes. Oh, yeah. Yes. So if I don't know if everybody heard that, but yeah, I think what you're asking is, does the Office of the State Fire Marshal have authority on a site to make a building owner resolve any concerns or clearance issues as illustrated by this fire hydrant? I guess I would answer that by saying yes, but also emphasizing that even though the Office of the State Fire Marshal is required by statute to inspect state-owned facilities, the entity that's going to come to your site and respond to a fire is not the Office of the State Fire Marshal. They're not driving up in a fire truck. It's the local jurisdiction. So what I would say is, to me, every state facility almost has 3 AHJs, or authorities having jurisdiction. One is the State Construction Office for design review and approval. And the second is the Office of the State Fire Marshal for the statutory inspections. And then the third is the local responding emergency fire department. And they all could say the same, but the one that's going to have the most authority to make a change is the local jurisdiction, that local fire department. Right, exactly right. Any other questions? All right, I appreciate y'all's attendance and have a good night.